My name's Steve Viachica. I'm an associate professor of instructional and performance technology at Boise State University. It's not every day you get to interact with an award-winning chief learning officer of a truly global organization. It's not every day you get to talk with somebody whose work has won ASTD's Best Award. It's not every day you get to talk with somebody who blogs for Harvard Business Review. She's got a book coming out in May, and she's an IPT alumnus. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Willyerd, now a founding partner at Future Workplace. Karie?
Well, hello there. Let's see here. Let me get us all set and ready to go here. Steve, do you see the screen here? Is everyone seeing my slides?
Yes, your slides are coming across.
Okay, perfect. So, just to be clear, I think most people have read the news that Sun has been purchased by Oracle. And so as a result of all of the exciting things that are happening that Steve was referring to with a book coming out and so on, I decided that it was time to try and step out into the brave world as an entrepreneur. So now I have a consulting business, and I have a secondary business to introduce an informal learning software platform. And I'll tell you a little bit about the predecessor of that was at Sun. So hello to all my fellow BSU, IPT sojourners, and I hope at the end of this conversation we'll have a chance to get some questions in. So I was going to start a little bit with what was the journey like? And for me, when I first came into Sun, I was at Sun 4 years and a couple of months. And it was the first time that they had brought together a bunch of groups to create a chief learning officer role. So there had been something called Sun University, but all it did was kind of leadership development programs. As it turns out, there were many, many, many functions at Sun that did training. And a group of people before I was there said, you know, does it really make sense that we've got all this duplication? So they banded together and sold the idea to the CEO that they should bring in a chief learning officer. And so the idea of creating a chief learning officer preceded me. But when I got there, they did not say, okay, here it is, it's all yours. It was, here it is, figure out how to make it all yours. So, so I formed a large team of people from a lot of different organizations, learning organizations at Sun. And we called it the Big Tent team. The Big Tent in political terms is a party like the Democrats or the Republicans that encompass a broad range of views as opposed to something that might be a singular focused political party like a Green Party. So, so we brought in people from all over Sun, and on this slide, the islands in the Sun, you can see where there were people from all over the place. So each one of these islands, for example, when you look underneath Sun U, you can see Sun Education Services. That was the business of selling Java and Solaris training worldwide. That was nearly a $200 million business. And each one of those little islands underneath there, Americas, EMEA, APAC, and HQ, reported up into different organizations. The Sun U function was actually fairly small, so as you can see at the top. So one of the challenges was figuring out how were we going to pull all of this together. Wasn't an easy journey. And so I'm going to show you some slides that I used when I was first at Sun, and that really display what my thinking was at the time. So I have not modified to do revisionist history. I've actually kept in the very same slides that I used from my first 6 weeks at Sun. So to just give you a sense of what is it that you think about when you're early on. So you know, I told them how much I was impressed with the capabilities of the team. And these guys, especially on the business side, because they were running this $200 million business and had gone through a lot of Six Sigma work, had so many metrics that they probably spent 20% of their time collecting and distributing and talking about metrics. And I said, in spite of the fact that that they were so splintered, it was good to see that they had done some work together. But I wish I had seen more of a focus on the learner. So in the learning business, which I have since come to learn is pretty common about people that are in IT learning businesses, they really focus on the product, and it's fairly rare to find people who have strong instructional backgrounds really thinking about the learner. So my wish I had seen more was more of a focus on the learner. And the thanks to those with vision was those people who decided to create a CLO position. Within 6 weeks of joining, I made some immediate staff changes and created this big tent team, which is we hadn't named it yet when I first did this slide. So that was the organization design process and team. Now, just a note on change management. It would have been really easy for me to just spend the weekend, design an organization, and come back. But Sun was not a top-down organization. It was a very collegial organization. You got things done through influence. So it in fact took 3 months of a team working to come up with all of the solutions about how we would implement. So it was a slower start, but I would argue that we ended up in a better place and a more rapid execution capability once we did put it in place. I put in some of my beliefs about learning so people could know where I was coming from, since I was an outsider to Sun. And so I talked off about many of the things you guys already know here. People learn more from experience than any other modality. So I wanted to make sure that when we designed programs, they included how people could add experience to it. This people are not commodities was really aimed at thinking about how we were running this large business, and that we weren't going to treat the students as just a paying entity. We were going to treat them as people and make life engaging for them in our training. People are not rats, so I am very philosophically, I really like thinking about a constructivist environment for learners, and thinking about the context of their work. And even though we owe a lot to people like Skinner and Bob Nager when he was first doing some work, I feel like learning theory has evolved beyond that, and so we should make sure that learning can be fun in the environment, and that we're looking for solutions other than training. The network model will win as a social structure model means I think that the top-down hierarchical model is going to go away. The Web 2.0 has so enabled life to be different, and the democratization of information, that people have to get comfortable with working in a networked fashion. A couple of other things here. Corollary 1, I believe the work in someone in learning really makes a difference, and those results can be measured. And corollary 3, Kirkpatrick is an old dude. So what I meant by this was there's a lot. And for those of you who have taken the evaluation course at BSU, it was one of the most eye-opening courses I'd ever taken, because I somehow just had bought into this, the only way there is to look at evaluation is the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick. And that's a very valuable theory, but it's an old theory, and there's lots of other ways to look at how to evaluate. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those ways that we worked in a little bit. The 10, I felt like this is really less about learning and more about an organization design, that it's better to make your decisions as quickly as you can and get them over with rather than lingering. This was in my 6th week of being there, by the way, and I said winning is more fun than losing. So I said, I promise you that within 3 years we're going to start winning awards. So I really had to deliver on that since I'd promised it very early on. This next one is about not getting too much on your plate. I'm an idea person, and I know I have to be careful about pacing at a level that we can execute at. So this was a little bit of just self-disclosure that I now know that. And that, to use the old analogy of the shoemaker's children has no shoes, that our mirror was going to be how we grow our own people, and that we would be thinking about the people that work for us. There was so much workforce planning, and here's how many head count we have everywhere. I just wanted to make the department feel more connected with that these were people that we were talking about, and not just head count and students that were numbers. So I'm going to skip some of these slides fairly quickly through. Maybe the main thing to say here is that there was really no consensus before who owned learning for different entities. It was pretty clear who owned the customer learning, but completely unclear who owned partner learning. Who owned employee learning was split into many, many different places. And then what was our involvement with university students, which is what we mean by communities, and the developers. So we ended up selling that we should handle the responsibility for all of that. And so we ended up consolidating. By the time I left, we had 850 employees, but we had also added all of the technical writers for all of Sun and all the people who did the language translation for our software products. Our target goal was to take money out, which is, of course, one of the reasons that would drive creating the position in the first place. But when we looked at the overall spend, which nobody had really done before, $10 million sounds like a lot, but it was really only about 5 to 7%. And what we ended up doing was cutting deeper than that so that we could reinvest. So if you've got a big spend, coming out with $10 million savings sounds like a lot, but it was we really did think through some ways to be able to cut and reinvest. Here's something that John Boudreau at the University of Southern California told me when I was talking to him during this time. He said, because I was trying to figure out how we do, the employee learning was all done by, like a profit, the employee learning at Sun University. So a student came and then we charged their department back, and there was no budget given to the university. Unfortunately, what John Boudreau told me was that really drives the wrong set of behaviors in an organization, because what a university will do is start to offer popular courses that cost a lot of money. And they're not driven to try and keep those costs down because they're charging that all back to business units. So he said the inevitable conclusion of a chargeback model in a corporate university is that the #1 course is going to be the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in fact, that was our #2 course when I first came there. And the #1 one just happened to be a mandatory course that was required of everybody that was coming in through a large acquisition. If that large acquisition hadn't happened, 7 Habits would have been our #1 course. So when you looked at our top 10 courses, they were all generic, off the shelf. You could have gone to a public offering of the courses, and there were very few that were strategically aligned. So we had to do a lot of work to change the funding model so that we could begin to deliver training that was strategically aligned to goals. So, so I immediately shut down all the generic programs that you could get at a public workshop, negotiated with the vendors to get discounts on their public workshops, and then told people, if you want to go to those workshops, if you want to go to 7 Habits, they're available all over the country. Here's your discount. You can go ahead and go. But those weren't going to be what we offered from Sun University. The other thing I did, I'm going to just cover the first and the last on this chart. The other thing that I did was, and I learned this from Donnie Romelli, who, I don't know if he's still there. I think he might have retired from, he was the COO of General Motors. Yes, General Motors, or Ford. Well, anyways, he was the CLO of one of the big automakers, and General Motors. What he taught me was, when he went into GM, he said he wanted to review every single purchase order, which in a company that size I thought, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But then when I got here and I saw how many purchase orders there were, there's so much business that's going on that you're unaware of. We had a $200 million, this was after we consolidated things, but we had a $200 million line of business, and we had about $35 to $50 million that was spent on training. And when we ran a report of all the open purchase orders, they totaled nearly $1 billion. So we had, nearly $100 million. So we had 4 times as many purchase orders open as all of the business that would flow through the department in a year. So we were able to just systematically start to close down purchase orders, which seems like a fairly administrative thing, but it really gave us an awareness of what our offerings were and where money was being spent. So Steve mentioned that we've won awards. We did win in October. We won the #1 worldwide best, and a couple of weeks ago we were ranked #11 worldwide in the training top 125. Along with, these are just some of them. We've won over 30 awards in total from different organizations, which of course has made the folks that that are in the function feel like they've got great resumes, and as it turns out, it really helps us in positioning with our customers on the Java Solaris training side of the business, because we include these brands in our training there. The vision that we came up with early on was learn to be open to and any of the topics that there might be. And our mission statement was to grow Sun's business profitably by providing innovative learning solutions that empower employees, enable our partners, network global communities, and bring value to our customers. So just a little bit about the org structure. We had these four that are kind of bronze-colored, copper-colored things are what you might think of as instructional design groups. So these were the people that were creating products. Somebody was creating products on systems and learning, and somebody had kind of the employee training down here. We created one of the reinvestment areas for us was web and technology, and so we created some very leading edge, which is really what won us our awards, things to enable all of the business. And then delivery happened through this Chief Learning Officer Global Learning Solutions. So all of these were regionally based. And it was actually interesting because there had never been a Chief Learning Officer, and there was a lot of debate over whether we could call the person who was head of learning for EMEA the Chief Learning Officer, for EMEA, and the person who was the Chief Learning Officer for France could be called that title, Chief Learning Officer. So I really wanted to share my title, so to speak, with folks so that they would have prestige in their local communities, whether they were working with the employee learning group or the customers. But we didn't change these are courtesy titles. They weren't necessarily getting big changes in salary grades and so on, so we just shared the courtesy title, which at the time was somewhat controversial, and then everybody got used to it, and it was widely accepted. And then these last two were things that I acquired later over time, which I was mentioning before, being able to do all of the documentation and so on, and globalization. One of the things that Steve had said, do you have any sample, and I meant sample dashboards, and so I'm going to flip through a couple here, and I don't mean to do the the clicker when if you're a woman and your husband's like clicking through 75 channels at once, but we kept dashboards of on a wiki that we reviewed every week on a bunch of things, and this is just one area as an example. So we were looking at our revenue and our customer satisfaction and so on. We were looking at internal things such as, are we losing any employees that are rated our highest level? We had run a survey that looked at our own group and what their, what some of their issues were. And when we were first starting, they were worried about, well, we don't understand where the handoff is between the instructional design group and the delivery group, and they felt like that middle part had some role redundancy, so we worked on cleaning that out. We had a great big enterprise solution, an ERP that we were implementing. It was called IBIS, so that was a key corporate goal, and we were working on that. We always would review our REDs in one group too to see, what have we done here. We were behind on implementing a curriculum for new managers, and just further metrics. Now, this is not evaluation; these are metrics. We would run all the way through. I wouldn't even know how to explain. We kept a firm on retainer that helped us select programs to do key evaluation on. This firm would come in, and so, for example, we had a very broad, widespread mentoring program. So we asked this vendor to help us with looking at, does mentoring pay off? And they took it not only through ROI, but through to being able to predict where mentoring would make the most impact. And so we found out, for example, as well, that mentoring had a more positive effect on mentors than mentees. It was positive for both in terms of attrition and promotion and so on. But since it was a totally voluntary program, it turns out that the people who volunteered to be mentors actually got promoted faster in the organization, and people who volunteered to be mentored ended up getting promoted faster as well. So there was a positive effect on both sides. I haven't put any slides in here to kind of show that whole methodology. We created an informal learning platform inside Sun, and we asked the same group to kind of say, what's been the overall impact on putting an informal learning platform in, and has it been a positive effect to Sun? And then we would review dashboards on things like what's the status on every course. We would issue just about a course a day. So, it was pretty important to stay on top of how many courses we did, and then we'd conduct regional reviews to look at what's happening in each region. So once a quarter, we'd go over each of the regions. So with that, I'm going to pause a second and make a transition to kind of our philosophy as it evolved about Learning 2.0. We're kind of fast forwarding now to some things. So the old world, and I hope you, I'm not going to tell you who the names are, but I hope you recognize some of the names at the top, but kind of a Learning 1.0 mode where we were, think of it as more of push, where it's considered training, it's fairly structured, program could or could not be mandated, fairly formal, and if it was on the web, it tended to be read-only learning, and evolving to a new world that's more pull-oriented. Instead of training, think of it as how people are learning. As you note, the learner is at the center here instead of in the prior slide where the instructor is at the center, where the instructor is human or the instructor is a machine. And it's more, it's enabled by a platform and more self-service and a lot more informal with people accessing knowledge from wherever they can get it. And there's a, one of the definitions of Web 2.0 is that it's read and write, that you're able to interact. And so with a learner who's being able to pull from so many sources, it requires a new model of thinking about learning. So we hired some really great folks, including a chief architect, a chief instructional design architect, to really think about how we would approach learning in our new environment. And so we wanted to be able to enable that users would gain more control over their learning and destiny. So what that looks like in terms of in terms of real learning environments is that we move from things such as instructor-led and web-based and virtual, where it's control is held by the instructor, and you're following taxonomies and it's subject matter experts and localized search, to more of a folksonomy approach that includes lots of Web 2.0 tools like the blogs and wikis, and includes user-generated content with Google-like searching to supplement. Now, 1.0 doesn't ever go away. It's not like 2.0 replaces it, but there's more room for this collaborative learning as opposed to a structured learning. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about some of the, what's that mean in real life when you try and make that happen. So for one thing, we designed, the chief architect worked on how would we create these collaborative learning environments that would first capture people's attention, because there's so much data out there now. There was a study done at the University of California at Berkeley that said knowledge is doubling as much as every 2 years, and in some fields less than that. In medical field, knowledge is doubling every 18 months. You probably feel the same way I do, where you are bombarded by information. So even capturing your attention in the world we live in today is difficult. And then once captured the attention, how do you motivate them? How do you get them motivated to be a full participant? And then how do we know that people have retained knowledge? So it's a whole different approach to thinking about learning, as opposed to you've got a captive audience in a classroom and you can take them through a very structured methodology. We were really trying to figure out how do you help learning happen in the environment when you can't necessarily capture them every time. So how will you grab their attention to get them all the way through to retention? And so one way we started with was with our new hire program. So we eliminated having a live classroom event. Instead, we started people with new hire before they came to work. And this is maybe the first page that they might get access to before they even come to work. That lets them begin to unaccelerate. That was all the basics, because it's kind of reading left to right. So that included everything that they needed to know to get started. Here's the checklist of things you need to do, who you need to go talk to, and so on. We gave them access to a social network so they could start to see everyone else who was joining at the same time, so they could start to develop friends before they showed up for their first day. And people who were new hires, and up to a year, you would stay within the new hire community and be inviting people back in. And then we would have learning modules that they could take before they even came to work to get to know some of them. And of course, this was available to them after they came to work. The Explorer was actually behind the firewall, so they couldn't get into this. But here they'd start to see all of the information about what are the goals for this year and how are those documented, which we called our playbook. And they could start to see some executive presentations. And then, one of the things that is always hard when you start at a new company is there's so much to learn about the products and services of a company. So we turned that into a game, and this game won several awards. It had 2 different platforms. The game allowed you, by the way, to you were competing against other people to win, and we were giving prizes every month for the highest winner. So here's an example of how someone would interact on a social networking page, and get to know folks. All of that was enabled by a mashup platform. So mashup is taking lots of different things and putting them together onto one page. If you're familiar with iGoogle or MyYahoo, those are mashup pages. If you've ever looked at Zillow.com to see what are the houses in my neighborhood selling for. That's a mashup because it's taking Google Maps and mashing it with data from real estate sales. So we created a space for learners to go to that was geared just towards learners. And so our learners never interact with an LMS. They never touched an LMS. They were only in the middle of this mashed up platform that allowed them to select and pull in the widgets that were the most important to them. And we wanted to make sure that that was a free form, no training required. You don't have to take training to learn how to use Google. And that it would create some really unintended and delightful adaptation. I'll tell you about one of those in just a moment. And that it would be social. So we were creating all of these kind of things here. Our My Learning homepage, as you can see here, now this is filled out, but again, each of these little boxes are widgets. And so you could go and pull in, you could choose from a whole bunch of different widgets to personalize it to your environment. As you can see, in the middle of the page here is the data that's coming from the LMS. Here's the courses that they've worked and what they've completed and so on. But we worked with vendors, for example, to make sure that once you came into our mashup page, you never had to sign into another system again. So in the lower left-hand corner are books that you could get. Now, we don't have these books in our library. They're going to a vendor library and pulling them up. And then we also enabled a really sophisticated search up at the top of the page so that when somebody put in a search, it would not only search courses, it would search our informal learning platform, it would search through books if those books had been cataloged in a search at the vendor's location, and take them right to the page in a book, which is very handy for technical people because in books like Safari, there's actually code segments that they could cut and paste and take into their code if they were a software engineer. And as you can see, this is how it would look if they had done a search. We created another learning platform for, that we're calling mobile performance support, but it was really this informal learning platform to create learning that was just in time, just enough, and just for them. And we called this the Social Learning Exchange. This was a product that is, if you think of it as kind of a sophisticated YouTube. What you could do with this is post anyone in the organization could post content to this SLX portal, just like you can on YouTube. What was different about it was, unlike YouTube, you could post any kind of media, so it didn't have to be a video. It could just be somebody putting a presentation together. Sorry about that. I just had to go on mute here a second to yell at the dog. And you could also you could also create content in here. So there's a video creation capability. It will automatically turn on your camera in your computer, for example, your webcam, or it would you could capture your screen and so on and post it. And then it would deploy to to any one of 95% of the mobile platforms that people were using. And so what we ended up doing was even taking formal learning that was in an e-learning format and breaking it into small chunks so that people could pick up their learning. A really typical use case would be somebody who is in services and is at a client location and is asked to repair one piece of equipment, and somebody would say to him, hey, you're from Sun, can you go over here and fix this other piece of equipment? And the services rep would walk over and would never have seen that piece of equipment and never been trained on it. So he or she could quickly pull out their mobile device and just do a search and find the content. We did a few other things in virtual worlds, so really kind of taking classroom training but putting it into I love the the avatars you get on Second Life because everybody's young, tall, and slender. So so there's my virtual Karie, which is definitely a better picture of Karie. And we did it because there were so, you know, we were doing training around the world, and some of our training was very advanced. And in one given region, we could get a couple of learners, and in another region, a couple of learners. And so rather than having people having to fly from different continents, we could start to we could make a real class happen that would, you know, that would be cost effective enough to us to actually offer it. And so we, you know, created these, you know, customer training centers online. It's fairly sophisticated because we also had virtualized desktops. So an instructor could, on another screen, be looking at what people were actually doing, could reach in and actually see what people were doing on their laptops and be able to offer them coaching about, oh, I see what you just did. So we created a fairly sophisticated combination of virtualized worlds and virtualized laptops. And then many people are interested in, okay, so fine, that's what you were doing and all the technical stuff. What about leadership development? And, you know, with that, we also moved to, you know, more advanced techniques on doing things. So we had not only this is part of our overall leadership talent strategy, and we were working closely with HR. I actually worked in a business unit with a dotted line into HR, so had a lot of interface with HR, and this was the, you know, the development component that we were handling. And one of those was one of those programs we put together was called Leadership Connections, and we were really looking at helping people understand the strategy for the organization. So we treated, when we had live training, when we would make an expensive investment in live training, we tried to make it more of a process and an experience than an event. So we always made sure that we would have pre and post experiences to ensure that learning was, people were preparing for learning and that learning continued once on the job. So as you can see here, we had a collaborative learning site for one-stop enrollment and program information. So we created a place for people to go that it was a mandatory requirement that they had to go. They could not come to the workshop if they had not gone and done all of the pre-workshop experience. And so we were monitoring and sending reminder notices to let people know that they had lots of things to do. And we did virtual coaching for them. So once they'd completed all their feedback, they would get on the phone with an external executive coach to get feedback on what their instrument said about them and to plan for it. And then there were some self-paced learning modules. We had these massive events with 96 to 100 executives coming through at a time, and we would put them into different rooms. The only time they would all be together was for guest speakers. Otherwise, they were working at a hotel in various conference rooms across the hotel in worlds, competing in a simulation where they got the chance to run the company, and they were competing against each other. We had this tiered effect of having VPs, one VP sitting at every table, and the VP was not the leader of the team. The VP was the coach, and so our facilitators and coaches were watching the VPs to make sure they were coaching well. So we had this tiered facilitators coaching VPs, VPs coaching directors, and a competition going on at the same time with the goal of, because we were a large functional organization, people tended to stay within their function, HR or finance or engineering, and they never got a chance to see how the whole company worked together. So this was a chance to step into the role of CEO and run the company for a virtual 3-year period. And then winners were awarded prizes and that kind of thing. And then our post-workshop experience was that they still had this collaborative learning environment where they could interact with the peers that they went through the program with. They had another 1-hour meeting with their executive coach, and they had a communication kit that was online that they could just go to this website and run the presentation and personalize it as they were going through it with their own team. So that's one example of one leadership development and course that was a live event, because we had so much focus on on virtual events, sometimes people wondered if we really did live events. That was an example of that. So I know I've really whipped through some things here, so I'm going to allow some time for Q&A. As they're kind of preparing the system for that, I'll tell you where my career is headed next, since Steve had asked that. So one of the, I showed in here the Social Learning Exchange, which is an informal learning platform. It turns out that that does not fit into the Oracle platform software strategy. So, so they are going to sunset it, and we got permission to create a competitor to it. So we started from scratch and created a whole new competitor. So we have a next week we'll be coming out with an informal learning platform to offer that to companies who are interested in having an informal learning platform to match with their formal learning platform. It'll be called JAMBOK, J-A-M-B-O-K, so which is, I think, going to essentially be an acronym for Join a Marvelous Body of Knowledge. So, so that's one role, and the second role is this future workplace. The book that I have written that's coming out is called The 2020 Workplace, How Innovative Companies Attract, Develop, and Keep Tomorrow's Employees Today. It'll be coming out from HarperCollins, and we hope to be able to have some consulting and so on developed from that. Well, we already do have, but hope it really grows more. So with that, I'll open up for questions and answers.
Hi, Karie. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy asks, was any learning required prior to the first day of work for the new employees? And how did you separate what was required learning prior to the first day of work and what was required once they started work?
Yes, we never had mandatory training before you showed up at work. The only thing we had mandatory before you showed up at work is you had to complete your paperwork before you showed up. And the paperwork listing was available on that website. There was a very clear set of what we considered mandatory, and you had a deadline of, I think, 90 days to complete your mandatory training. And the mandatory tended to be the things that I think a lot of us think of as with compliance and you know, compliance-related issues that were mandatory.
One of the things that interested me in your work is Web 2.0 has, in some respect, become a holy grail for managers. They look at the different things it can do. They think about community of practice. They see nice articles in Harvard Business Review, and they want to get one of these things yesterday. One of the things that has interested me are the trade-offs between having people generate their own content, the fact that some of that content may not necessarily reflect Sun's business goals, and the balancing between the creation of that content and then the criticality of the content that people create. How did you manage that at Sun?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I get. Of course, I really didn't go into a presentation about our Web 2.0 implementation here, but it's one I get at every conference, so, or every time I present. So a couple of things that we did to work with that. First off, one of the things that if you're implementing a Web 2.0 platform that it has is rating and tagging. So when you think about if you go and buy anything on Amazon, what's going to present to you first, one of the things that you can look at is most popular or most highly rated. So you can start to see, you know, the crowd itself will make some decisions about what is good content. So there's that feature in any Web 2.0 platform. What we did with our informal learning platform was we used a Google search appliance to help drive it. And when you think about when you go into Google, what happens is there's content that comes to the top of the page. You're presented with ads at the top of the page. and there are ads on the side of the page in any Google search. We use that feature to bring to the top of any search the content that the organization determined was the best content. And instead of appearing as an ad, it appears as editor's choice. So now anyone who's going into this informal learning platform can see, here's the authenticated editor's choice content, and then here's the crowd content. So they would at least get a chance to see what's the, is there any significant difference between that. And we would be kind of going through the content, and if we found content that we thought had issues, we could put that in our comments and make sure our comments were going to the top so that people, when they're reading it, say, ooh, somebody has said this has got some, errors in it. And typically when that would happen, one of the things that's different about this than going to an Amazon is it's your real name as the author of content that's going there, and your career is tied with it. You're building a reputation. Are you putting up garbage, or are you putting up real content? So people are very motivated to keep their content accurate so that they don't appear to be incapable. So those were a couple of ways that we did it.
I wanted to ask, were there any regular attempts to build in pre- and post-experiences for customer training to promote better transfer of learning?
Yeah, a great question. We were just getting to, some of this we were experimenting with internally. That was the great thing about having both internal and external. We'd really gotten how to do some of this fairly systematically on an internal before we would go throw it open. When we were training over 600,000 students a year. So before we went and tried to do this on a massive scale, we wanted to get it completely worked out. And so we had just started our plans for what FY10 we're going to include to ensure we could do that. But we did not get to that yet in the other than the kind of the basics. So the answer would be no.
Travis asks, how do you see instructional and performance technology becoming more important in implementing your concept of the 2020 workplace?
It's one of the, I'll have an article in July about 20 predictions for learning and development in 2020. And, one of the things that I think is going to happen, and this was something that we did, the other thing that we did for this informal learning platform is we decided, okay, what is the role of the learning function when you've got as much of this? Yes, there will always be instructor-led, but is that the only role? And we decided that the role of the learning function was to set the performance standards for an organization so that people knew what they needed to do to achieve competence. So whether it's formal or informal doesn't matter. There will still be this level of achievement that you need to demonstrate to be capable to perform your job. So I think determining the performance standards and then setting up a process for people to demonstrate achievement to those standards is going to be an important part of the 2020 workplace. We did that with our, we did that in two areas at Sun. The first one was in sales. So to get an accreditation we had 3 levels of accreditation, and you could accredit in up to a dozen topic areas. But to achieve an accreditation, you had to pass a test, and you had to demonstrate a behavior. In the case of sales, it was incorporate your knowledge into an account plan and have it signed off by your boss. That was actually show up as a course in the LMS. As soon as your boss signed off for it, it went into the LMS. And the third thing was that you actually had to make a sale happen. So, and that was also your boss signed off. Yes, you sold something that you had never sold before in here, and that went in. And when you had all 3 of those together, it triggered an accreditation, which became part of your record and your files. And then now we could go out, and since that was tied to the HR information system, we could find, well, who knows how to do this, sell this particular piece of equipment or service this piece of equipment, and is, located in Switzerland and speaks German. so we could, really do workforce planning with it. So documenting the performance standards and accrediting people, I think, is going to be part of the 2020 workplace.
One of the things that I've seen you do in the course of this presentation is use the term learning for a broad variety of ways to improve performance on the job. You have formal training, informal learning. You provided all sorts of different ways to create and access information. You provided software tools. And you've done this under the guise of the term learning. It seems that there's a lot of performance technology operating behind the scenes.
Right, there is.
And how do you navigate then between what you do as an IPT practitioner who has this broad and deep knowledge of performance technology, and then filter that in ways that resonate with your clients in the organization?
Right. So for example, in the and I was just describing what we were doing in sales. That was actually a pure performance technology solution.
It sounded like that to me.
Yeah, it was. But I didn't use that language with the client. What I said is, what do you care about? And what the EVP of sales said was, I care that our sales folks sell everything that's on the back of the truck. So in other words, what would happen was salespeople were selling what they were comfortable with. We had a complex set of offerings. One could argue too complex. So people would just get comfortable with and familiar with selling one or two things. So the way we set this curriculum up was you had to get certified in something you had never sold. And we could also then, of course, it's a real easy ROI. So in just one content area, people certified and sold over $300 million of product that they had never sold before. It's really easy to do an ROI when you can demonstrate that you affected sales by $300 million for a $6 million investment. So it was actually pure performance technology, but I used the word learning to describe this very broad set of activities that went from butts in seat in a classroom paying a fee to something that didn't look like learning at all. It was more of a series of activities guided by their manager that included eventually dumping it into a learning management system. So I would say that the whole experience of really understanding what performance technology meant has informed everything I do.
So what you define then as curriculum, Linda asked, encompasses all these different activities, and they're bundled under the term learning because that's a term that resonates with the client and lets you do the magic you can do to improve performance throughout the organization in ways that meet business goals.
Correct. Correct.
So what happened when you came in and within a very short time of arriving in your position, you got rid of most of the courses comprising the training?
Oh, for the internal?
Yes.
Well, I should say that what we did was we supplemented it by buying an e-learning library. So, we went out and contracted with Skillsoft and got a whole bunch of e-learning libraries and said, and if your manager won't approve it, the e-learning library is free. So all the e-learning prior to me being there had been charged for, so they would charge for every course that someone took. And what I did was, convince the CEO that he should pay for that, since I wouldn't have had budget to do it. So the CEO agreed to pay for it. And so now I did two things at once. I said, here's a discount. You can go get it at a public course, and won't you learn a lot by being with folks from other companies? And here's free learning. So it ended up being a perceived win for employees because now all of a sudden they get all this free training, and they've never had any free training at all at Sun.
Fascinating. So you took away the stuff that you knew had no transfer to the job, and
Well,
were able to
indirect transfer to the job. I mean,
okay.
really, I mean, I think there's value in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I've taken it myself. I'm a facilitator in it. But I just didn't feel like it was what Sun needed at the time and aligned well with the business objectives, because we had no courses that were looking at what is it that Sun is doing this year with our, what's the strategic direction, what are the goals for the year, and what training aligns to that. There had been no work done on that. And I wanted to, with limited resources, I wanted to focus on that as opposed to kind of general skill development.
One of the situations that's common with people in our field is that we work in organizations that have primarily become order takers for training requests. What advice could you provide for those who want to move out of the order-taking business and into the performance improvement business?
It's really funny because I had that exact conversation with the CEO when I was there, less than a month. And the interesting thing he said, he asked me that question. He said, are you going to be an order taker or are you going to be a thought leader? So, so I think almost everyone that's in learning wants to be a thought. They yearn to be of more relevance to the business. They may feel like they're boxed in or stuck in this role of order taker. So I think you can never just turn off order taking. You have to, because that's what I inherited, and I couldn't just go in and turn off order taking. But you had to really sit and evaluate how can you reposition this in their language to make them see that this other solution I'd be giving them is actually what they meant to ask for. They just didn't know how to ask for it. So it's getting clever with each case of order taking to help reposition what it looks like without getting, I think one of a great skill is to learn how to do that in the language of business and not in the language of our field. So I never use the words performance technology with a client. I do with my staff. I do with other professionals in the field, but never, and I mean never, with a client do I use those words. I always talk to them in their language and what it is that they're trying to achieve, and use words like, well, have you considered, because I've seen this done one the other time, and then, if people see that you really know your stuff and you're not coming at it from an experimental viewpoint, but have actually done some things that demonstrate that you know what you're doing, I mean, 9 out of 10 people are going to listen because they want the help too. You'll get the 1 in 10 that's just insistent on doing it a certain way, and then fine, you just do it. Oh, I've got an example of 1 out of 10. 1 out of 10, somebody wanted to implement a course. Our My Learning system has rating and tagging, so when any course that's in the LMS, people can write comments on and they can rate it. This client insisted on doing it exactly their way. We did it exactly their way. And people started giving it really low ratings and writing bad comments about the course. And the person asked us to take it down. Well, now we work at a technology company that was around, Web 2.0 tools, and we said, well, that's actually, you can't do that. That's dishonest to take down the comments that you don't like. However, if you'd like with us to work with you on improving the course, we'll call it, version 2.0 and take down the comments for version 1.0. And so they did. So that's a way in which Web 2.0 can help enable, motivation of customers and clients to, to move to more forward thinking, because everybody's commenting about everything nowadays.
So sometimes you just give them what they want and then wait for a teachable moment to get them where they need?
Yeah, I mean, you've got to decide what are battles and what are wars. So, so you just, some things are just not worth the aggravation, and just, keep on working with them until they're kind of ready. And it ended up, that particular case ended up being a really wonderful experience because they kind of got it, and then took our advice from there on out, but not before we just took an order.
And we have one last question from Iris, who asks, how did you get management buy-in to allow the needed time for employers to take the e-learning and the vendor courses?
I'm not quite, could you try that question again? I'm not quite sure I followed it, Steve. Sorry.
I think she's asking, sometimes we are in positions where we create training in good faith and then find out that there's no support for it in the workplace, even to the point of going in and taking the training, let alone applying it to the job.
Oh, well, you know, first off, I know some CLOs create advisory councils that are at the overall company level. I didn't do that. I created one advisory council that included the CEO that was for leadership development, but otherwise we created these advisory councils that were related to areas of expertise. So the EVP of sales owned the sales curriculum. It wasn't subject to all kinds of other people. It was the EVP of sales and a few, you know, the head of marketing and the head of one of the business units would do the overall sales curriculum. So when we were implementing something, we were running all of these curriculum choices through sponsors. And when you've got a sponsor behind it and you go back and say, okay, so we've put these in place, but it's not happening, we didn't have to do anything. They're going to go out and make it happen. So they were going out and, so I guess maybe the answer is push ownership away from being, it's the learning department trying to make learning happen to it's the line of business that cares enough about developing the skills of their people to get to a new level of performance that they make the learning happen. So we just really didn't have, the only, boogabear for any organization is compliance training, and that's just, because we said so, because it's a legal requirement. And that was the one that would be the hardest. But anything else was always owned by some line of business who was helping drive the implementation, and in fact, we would insist that they have someone from their organization who would follow through when training wasn't happening, rather than it coming from the, from us.
Thank you. And will Jambock be offered for any kind of small-scale testing and usage?
Yes, it will. So if you're interested, you should give me a call. Our first customer is Thomson Reuters, and second customer is McKesson. So they're both going in with just a few thousand people at a time as a pilot. But we have an MBA team out of Colorado State that's writing our business plan as part of their capstone entrepreneurship product. So for those 6 people, we're putting them on Jambock to get a chance to experience it. So so we're doing just even little groups so we can kind of test it out and see how it's going. So.
And if someone's interested in that, how do they contact you?
Did you give them my email? Do they have my email?
I can give them your email.
Yeah, so it's just easy, Karie@futureworkplace.com.
Okay.
Okay.
Karie, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us today. We really appreciate your being with us.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much. It's kind of fun to connect back with my roots.
Indeed. I look forward to seeing you at future conferences.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.